a unique individual. I was able to be his deputy, like you folks. I had the opportunity to work for him, with him. He's the only man I ever knew that never said anything bad about anyone else. Tremendous, tremendous individual. The living embodiment of the golden rule, an example for us all. So we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Our first speaker is our very good friend, Secretary Bruce Babbitt, certainly a friend of Western Water. Mr. Secretary.
All of you, so many friends and associates involved, we've all been working together from this side. It's pretty fair saying over the hill types here. Coming back, one group, as we're speaking, especially thank all of you, and to express my pleasure that there's another generation that see all of you to share a few memories of Bob. When I came to Ontario in 1993, the Bureau of Reclamation was, to put it mildly, totally dysfunctional. And I wasn't quite sure what the problem was. But first of all, I got an angry call from President Quint, who hid with the Bureau of Reclamation and the head of cabinet. But he said, Bruce, I brought you here on the assumption that you were going to manage this. Getting angry calls from the governor of Nevada. And then he calls me again in passing. He says, I'm getting all this press from Arizona, which says that Babbitt is not up to the job. So we're going to do about it. And at that point, it became clear to me the problem was the transition brought about a fair number of political appointees who just weren't making. And I delved into it briefly, wondering how I could possibly sort this out. And I met Bob Johnson. And it very quickly became clear to me this was one man who was going to make me a success at the Department of Interior. And we talked kind of off on the sidelines when all the other political appointees were not around. And his compassion, his sense of relationship, and the crystal clarity of what we needed to do on the Colorado and across the Bureau was that I finally began simply bypassing the bureaucracy of the assistant secretaries, the deputy secretary, all of the others, and talking to Bob. And his advice, we were then tangled up in the refinancing of the Central Arizona project. A project which then as now seems benighted with difficulties. Bob would give me advice, and then in staff meeting in Washington, I would discuss these issues. It was kind of wonderful. I didn't know what was going on. And I finally said to Bob, you've got to do this work, and you've got to deal with the bureaucracy, and you've got to keep me out of this, and you've got to discuss everything with me, and that concern worked. And Bob was so skillful in his style, with on the side, quietly reaching agreement. He would rework all the way through the bureaucracy as Justice Bob Johnson situated. makes the same decision. And he had managed to subvert the entire garage. I stated there just as an example of how we bonded, how we worked, all of the big issues, quantitative settlement agreement, and surplus entitlement, all of the big issues. You can read about those in this book. And what I would urge upon you is don't think of it just as a history. It really is a sociology from which you can learn a lot about how to deal with people and how it is you can be successful. How it is it's not enough just to be smart and accomplished. One of the problems we're having now with all the basin stuff is there's all kinds of smart people negotiating, putting out studies and stuff. Negotiation is going on. Relax. Wisdom. All trying to involve personal relationships and admonish. Of course, thank Terry Fulp and Rita Sudman. Put this together as Bob was declining and really needed to. And there's Rita and Terry. And read it. Bob just shines in these pictures. Okay, thank you very much.
I so appreciate being here today to talk about Bob Johnson, who I knew in so many different facets of his career and mine. First, I want to thank Chris Polly for organizing this, for putting the impetus behind it. I think all of us here cared a lot about Bob. But I think the reason he did that, Chris helped build Bob's post-reclamation life and future and career. And I think he saw the vision of if Bob had been so amazing in leadership and interior in the West at reclamation, he would provide that same leadership to National Water Resources Association, to the Water Education Foundation, as Rita and others have seen. But I think this is what happens from a life well lived. Your voice, your vision carries on. And I think our job to look at a man's career and life that had so much integrity and humor and loyalty, and look at what we can learn from that. So I look at the friendships he built out of colleagues, Terry Fulp, Rita, Bob Snow, everyone here, Lorri, Nadine, Bob, everyone, all of us here. And I wanted to tell one quick story, and I've told it before, so I'm sorry if it's a repeat, but I knew Bob as I was a Senate staffer, and we'd call him in and say, why aren't you running the YDP, the human desalting plant? And he'd be like, well, you know, and he would be so polite and calm. When in my earlier career, maybe I was less polite and calm. I think I was always polite, but I wasn't as calm. And Bob just had it in his DNA, I think, whether his early career or his later career. What most of us, I think, learn later, which is if you don't find a solution that works for everyone, it's not going to work. It's going to fall apart. And I remember being in a room with Bob and a number of his advisors. We were in Washington, D.C., and we were at a very breaking point on negotiations for the Colorado River. We had 6 states lined up saying, Arizona, they're not cooperating, they've brought up new ideas, we can do this without them. And I would say that 2/3 of the voices in that room were telling Bob, we can do this without Arizona. It's time to move forward. This isn't going to work. And Bob, to his credit, that wasn't Bob's vision. That wasn't how he knew things were going to work. And Bob took a step back, because he had to, because people were crowding around him. And he said, no, let's give this another try. Why don't I fly out? Why don't I go have dinner with a few people? And I think some of those people yelled at him at those dinners. And I'm sure when we all look back, if anyone yelled at Bob, they're ashamed of themselves now. But do you know what happened? is it worked. And I think it's because no matter how upset you were with where maybe Reclamation's position was or another state's position was, you knew you could talk to Bob. And Bob wasn't going to be sneaky. Bob wasn't going to go around you. Bob wasn't going to tell other people what you said. Bob was going to take that internally and work with his staff and try and find a solution that worked for everybody. I think he can be so proud of doing that in his career. He can be so proud of the victories that he brought to the western states in so many different areas, not just the Colorado River. I know I'm proud to have worked with him as he was my boss. He was in many ways a mentor about how you get things done. I was his constituent. I was his colleague at other times in my career. And you couldn't ask for someone who could, one, break the tension with a really bad dad joke, or could move forward when he knew it was time to move forward, make a decision, and bring everybody along with him. And so I thank you all for inviting me to be part of this, for the incredible hard work to put this book out. And I'm very happy to meet you, and I'm so proud of your father. And thank you for sharing him with us these many years. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and speak about my friend, mentor, and yes, my predecessor in the Commissioner's Office at the Bureau of Reclamation. So, and that's what I want to talk about. The best job in DC that people should know about is to follow somebody who's a complete failure. Then you just want to, if they're not complete failure, you want them to be, not to meet expectations. Needless to say, I didn't have that luxury. I had to follow Bob Johnson. And instead, I got to follow the guy who was revered as a leader, who was respected as a manager, who was greatly admired because of the type of person he was. And then, damn it, on top of all of that, a guy with a significant record of accomplishments. So just whether it was as regional director or whether it was commissioner, Bob Johnson was involved in developing the surface criteria, the interstate banking regulations, the quantification settlement agreement, the Arizona Water Settlement Act, and then, of course, the crowning jewel, the 2007 shortage guidelines, which as much as they're debated and discussed and groused about, etc., have, with some refinements, stood the test of time for 20 years in a period of intense crisis with respect to aridity in this basin. So, not for the faint of heart, and gladly I was ignorant of a lot of those things at the time and stepping into the position. And when he wasn't doing all those things that I just mentioned, Bob was also contributing to the health of the organization as a whole by mentoring, developing outstanding leaders, most of who are sitting along here now, and one who just spoke in front of me, as Deputy Commissioner. Just a terrific team between Lorri, Terry, Bob. I'm going to count him, even though you're the odd solicitor's office component of that, but no doubt greatly mentored by Bob. And then, of course, even David Fulp today. So, just tremendous in what he contributed in so many different ways to a wonderful organization. So, I hope I haven't turned this around on me as being about me and a pity party for me, because nobody should be pitying me, because he did leave very big shoes to fill, but they were pointed very much in the right direction. And so whatever successes that I, subsequent commissioners, the organization has had as a whole, are a lot because of the foundation that Bob laid, with the accomplishments that he had, with the people that he developed that were integral to the work that I did when I was Reclamation Commissioner. And so that's the true testament to what a great, terrific individual and a leader that Bob Johnson was, is you cannot wrap this all up in a certain set of accomplishments or actions. It's the totality of who he was as a person, as a leader, and that's quite a legacy. And he was quite a guy in the Colorado River Basin. This is greatly. Thanks, everybody.
It's so great to be here. I want to thank the Johnson family for sharing Bob with us. He spent so much time with us, and many days more than he actually spent with his family, and we all benefited from it. Chris, thanks for all of your work, and Terry, your work. In the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition of legacy is a tangible or intangible thing handed down by a predecessor. We've heard a lot about Colorado River. I want to talk about leadership. Bob Johnson was an amazing, amazing leader. People loved Bob. People wanted to work for Bob. They wanted to follow him. They wanted to work hard. Bob was kind. He was compassionate. And he brought that human element to the workplace every single day. I appreciate the fact that Brenda recognized Bob's corny jokes. I regularly told him, Bob, those jokes are bad, man. We gotta find you some new ones. But you know, at the end of the day, Bob would go into a group like this. Tension could be really high. He would tell one of those really dumb jokes, and he would just laugh like it was funny, you know. And the rest of us laughed because he was laughing, and the tension just went down in the room. And that was his interest in the people. Bob was always interested in the people. Bob was very interested in doing the right things. He would tell us all the time, do the right thing, do the right thing. And he walked the talk because he always tried to do the right thing. And if you screwed up, he didn't bring you in and scold you, talk down to you. He expected a few things. He expected, number one, that you would assess where it went wrong. Number two, he would expect that you reframe your strategy. And three, most important, he would expect that you never threw up your hands and gave up. Go at it again. Recalibrate, go at it again, Lorri. We'll figure it out. As we're leaving here today, I would challenge all of you to do an inventory of the gifts that Bob left with you, those leadership gifts that we carry around, and also think about how are you passing those gifts on to others. Because Bob Johnson's legacy as a leader lives through us. He was an amazing man. I know he helped me in my career. He helped me be a better person. And I'm sure that many of you feel the same. So please, let's keep his legacy alive. Keep passing on those great, great gifts that he gave us.
Certainly a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everyone for coming. Chris, thank you for hosting. And Gabe, I want to reiterate what Lorri said. Thanks for all you, the family, did to give Bob to us. A remarkable man. I don't want to repeat what we've already heard. Bob certainly changed my life, as he changed many people's lives in this room. What I really want to say is there's a book. And this book was Bob's last gift to us as a river community. He wanted desperately to publish this book before he passed. He had the fortunate ability to have kept a record throughout his career because Reclamation had an oral history program. And Bob had been interviewed for 25 years throughout these key things that he worked on. And so that transcript was over 700 pages long, and that's what Bob started with, was taking things out of these transcripts and making them into a book. Bob also wanted all proceeds of the book to go to the Water Education Foundation. And many of you know he was the president of the board before he passed away, and was always a firm supporter, as all of us are, for the foundation. So, that being said, when Bob passed, several of us, including mainly myself, said, I don't think I can do this anymore. It was really fun to work with Bob again. And so we would help him, and he'd read what we had written, taking his words, but firming it up a bit, doing fact-checking, all those things you have to do to publish a book. And it was so much fun getting to work with Bob. Well, after a couple months, Chris called me and said, we need to finish this. And Chris was right. And Chris was willing to continue to support what it would take to really produce a published book. And let me say this, some of you may have published a book, have two pieces of advice to all of you who haven't, and you might think you want to. Number one is you've got a journal, which Bob had for his transcripts. None of us can recall to write a book 20 plus years later. You have to have captured. And the second one then is you have to question, do you really want to publish a book? It's one of the hardest things in the world to do from my perspective, to make it into a printed copy. The editorial team is listed in this book, and I give every one of them so much credit. It was a group effort. We worked really hard to finish this off. So to get the book, there is a QR code on a piece of paper back there. You scan it, it takes you to the water education page, and you make a donation. The suggested donation is $25. You make whatever donation you want to make. And it goes straight to the foundation to continue the work of educating people about water. And so I think it's a very good thing, and again, it's what Bob always wanted. And so I want to leave you with, this is in the book, I'm going to read just a quick passage. Bob said this, on the Colorado River, relationships matter. And that's true whether they are relationships among the states, tribes, and water users in the basin, or the relationship between the United States and Mexico. You have to have people who have worked together, trust each other, and have achieved common goals together. And yet there will be they will be at odds from time to time. At those times, relationships really matter. That's Bob Johnson.
My name's Bob Snow. I work in the solicitor's office. First meeting I was assigned to, I'm actually going to just tell a couple of quick stories and leave you with a couple of quotes. I'll start with Bill Rennie. He used to say, maybe everything's been said, but not everyone has said it. So that's why I'm up here. Everything has been said, but I'll add a couple of notes. First meeting I ever went to was with, and there's Steve Vinden, a few folks from LC. It was my first meeting as an attorney, and who was chairing it but Bob Johnson. Great memory. And it was the same Bob Johnson for the next 30 plus years. I won't tell the story now, but maybe with others later on. I had the grace of having a last conversation with Bob Johnson out of the blue a couple of days before he passed. It was what we call a butt dial. It was a mistaken call that he called me, and it turned into one of the most memorable conversations of my life. But the same Bob Johnson was there throughout. And to just pick up on a couple of threads, Secretary Babbitt mentioned it about the charisma that Bob would have to bring people together. Terry Fulp just read you the words of, you can all hear Bob Johnson saying those words when Terry was reading them. That's who he is. That's who he was. That's the legacy he left us. It seems preposterous for me to say this, and it's heartbreaking, but just a couple of months ago I was having a conversation with Bob Johnson, about Bob Johnson with Pat Terrell. And what another great man. And we were comparing notes about Bob. Pat was a commissioner from the state of Wyoming. And we landed on 3 words to describe Bob, Pat and I. Decency, creativity, and collaboration. Then Pat added, it's sad that somehow those traits haven't become cool anymore. That's a Pat Terrell for you. But let me read you this other quote from Pat Terrell, and I'm reading it for a reason. Pat was describing his life on the Colorado River, and what Pat was really describing is, in part, the river community that Bob Johnson helped create. And as I walked in here, Gabe said to me, I bet you Bob had touched a lot of people across this basin, and every one of them could tell stories, and I know we could. It'd be nice to be here for about a day telling the Bob Johnson stories. I also have some of Bob Johnson's bad jokes that I won't share with you, but if you want them afterwards, I'll be in the corner repeating them. There's a good one about a guy in a collar. Here's what Pat Terrell said. The hard-working water professionals along the Colorado River have found ways in the last 30 years to develop conservation plans, to promote system augmentation, to provide for sediment flows in the Grand Canyon, manage for endangered species, and control salt, and still have the meet the consumptive needs along the river. Not once were we paralyzed. Not once. Pat went on to say, it's a history I'm proud of. If there were ever a community that can solve problems like we have today without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, it is the Colorado River water community. That's Pat Terrell describing the system that we all grew up in, that Bob helped create. Now, speaking for myself, I don't know if the Colorado River water community really can solve the problems we face today. Secretary Babbitt put his finger on, is there someone to catalyze those relationships and provide that spark? I'm not sure about that. I am not sure about that. But here's what I am sure of. If people want to continue that community, they could pick up on some Bob Johnson traits and would help them succeed. Here's what I would say. Here's a little recipe from Bob Johnson. Collaborate. Listen hard to everyone. Brenda Berman put her finger on that. De-escalate conflicts. De-escalate conflicts, and don't play things out in the press all the time. Talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues. Engage with optimism and be prepared to make principled compromises. That's kind of the Bob Johnson mantra. And if you want to know what a person looks like who engages with optimism, looks like that. Just look at that, just study that picture, and that's your roadmap. So I'm going to leave you with one last quote. It's my favorite quote in the book, and it's from a man I just met, Gabe, Bob's son. And he said, this book places a period at the end of a long life of service to our country. It's the last sentence in the book. If I, as a lawyer, I would want to edit it, I probably would say, in particular to the Colorado River Basin, because we consider Bob ours, even though he served the nation as a whole as commissioner. But Bob Johnson was a man of this basin, and he affected everyone he met in a positive way. Not many people can say that. Thank you for sharing your father with us, Gabe. It means the world to all of us.
For those that don't know me, I'm Jack Symes. I'm the former area manager of the Southern California area office, and I get a lot of comments about my hat. So hat on or hat off. Most people say, I don't recognize you if you don't have your hat on. I want to thank Chris Polly for the opportunity to come today and share a few words about the relationship that I had with Bob, which was really an amazing experience, because my experience with Bob is not with reclamation. My experience with Bob goes back to when I was with the Army as a civilian at Yuma Proving Ground, and we hosted an event, and it was a joint federal event for one of the EEO programs, and Bob was there, and I was like, who is this person? And he was just an amazing leader. And it reminded me of a quote that one of my senior NCOs when I was a ROTC platoon leader would remind me of, who would you like to go to battle with? You know, a great leader, because you're going into war. And that's who Bob Johnson was to me that day, because of the way he had the charisma, the foresight, the ability to reach everybody in the audience. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. And I said, someday I'd like to work for a guy like that. And lo and behold, I got an opportunity from a former area manager in Yuma that said, how would you like to come to work for Reclamation? So hence I changed agencies and had this great experience to work with Bob Johnson on numerous occasions. He was always the point person as the regional director, and that's where I knew him best. And I truly miss him dearly. He called me just a little before Crua last year, asking for some help with pictures. So some of these wonderful pictures that you see in the book, I was a small part in helping to find them because they were important to Bob, and when Bob calls, you take action. If Bob calls and you don't take action, you're going to find out the hard way, which I don't wish on anybody. But again, it's a sign of a true leader. He gave his all. This book is a great read. I'm here because of this book, and I've met many of you, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces because I think it's something that you all should take heart at. A lot of great lessons, a lot of good storytelling. That was Bob, and of course, the jokes. So thank you all. It's a pleasure, and I hope to see you at booth 44 and get a book. Take care.
I'm Bob Quint. I am former chief of staff in the Bureau of Reclamation, now retired. And you'll see that I'm retired. My notes are in the back of the Washington Post across from me, so if anybody needs a solution to have it. Let me be the first to not thank Chris Pauley. Putting me at this point in the agenda with all these great speakers ahead of me that have done a great job. Not a good place to be. But I'll do my best. Bob Johnson, what a guy. I have worked either with or for Bob Johnson since 1989 in Boulder City. The trait I remember about Bob that hasn't been mentioned yet was his persistence and perseverance with things. Also, Bob had a great love of golf. Now, Bob, as you've heard, was very, very, very good at many, many, many things. Golf, not so much. I played numerous times with Bob, and one time he invited both Kirk Rogers and I to play with him in Scottsdale at the TPC course there, stadium course. Very, very hard course. So we're out there playing, we're all struggling with the course, and something became apparent to me that I hadn't really observed with Bob before. Bob seldom cussed, seldom swore. I learned many new statements and many ways to describe golf shots from Bob that day that I can't repeat here. But Bob persevered, persisted, finished the round. And one of the other parts of that golf round was we were inspecting the CAP Canal, which runs right along the golf course. So as a result of our round, the CAP Canal passed the inspection. But since I hadn't had my annual performance review, Bob was also the medalist of our group that day. So they say that only the good die too young, and that does apply, I think, to Bob Johnson. As for me, I'm going to live a very, 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 very long time. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Rita.
Familiar faces. I've been retired a while, but water doesn't get out of your blood, and Bob found me and said, "You got to help me with this book." Well, he had a lot of good thoughts together, and as I first started reading it, I said, "By the way, this is not a Pollyanna book. There's some honest, straightforward things in here." It's like, "Ooh, really? You went to the White House? They said that? Are you really going to leave that in there, Bob?" "Yes." "Okay, good. I like this." So one of the 12 points in the back of the book is treat your enemies like your friends. And that was Bob Johnson. He really gave examples here of, beyond the negotiations, taking somebody to the airport where you disagreed, just talking a little bit, and keeping your enemies close. And I really think there's a lot of lessons here. A lot of people talked about relationship building. That's important. Now, a lot of folks would think, okay, this is a history of the Colorado River at this time. But it's more than that, because it's a book that I recommend you give a lot of your younger folks who work with you, because they'll learn that how to work with people, how to keep coming back. Lorri described it, a lot of people did. I started as a young reporter covering this beat, the Colorado River and water in California, and I can see that a lot of people came and went and are really forgotten. And some of them aren't even worth remembering that have had these jobs back and forth. But many are, and Bob was especially, the reason that you're all here is that he will be remembered. He was a person of deep integrity. And I know it's out of fashion when you see things going on these days, but it really makes a difference to be a person of your word, men and women. And I think that Bob is an example of that, and I think that's why there's a lot of good information in this book that we can all benefit by. And Bob was a supporter of the foundation. He really believed in the next generation. The water leaders, Jennifer, my predecessor, has started a program on the Colorado River Water Leaders Program, and I hope that some of the proceeds of this book, I know they will go to that program, and I hope that you'll support that, as Bob took his time to support the Water Education Foundation and all of you. And again, we couldn't have done it without you, Chris, putting the funds together to help us, and the rest of the editorial team. Thank you so much. It's so much fun to be here and see everybody. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yep, I'm Gabe Johnson. I am, in fact, yes, Bob Johnson's son. All you have to do is picture me with a full head of hair, perfectly combed, and a giant bushy mustache. Yeah, they say that the family resemblance is all in the eyes. Maybe you can see it now. It's in the eyes, the droopy. Anyway, I want to say, give a special thanks right off the bat to Chris Polly. You have put together quite an amazing event that honors my father appropriately and allows people to come up here and say a few words about the way that they'll remember him, and allows us all to speak just to each other in a social environment, talking and remembering my dad and honoring him. So thank you very much. I want to just Chris said I should come out and I should wear a sport coat and a tie. Now, you may have heard I'm a retired Air Force guy. I'm used to wearing fatigues every day. You've seen them, green camouflage looking stuff. And after a while, that's like pajamas. And so when you put on a tie and a coat, it's not comfortable. But I'll do it for Dad. Love you, Dad. I retired 2 years ago, so I haven't been wearing sport coats. But putting this on reminded me of a little story about my dad. When he was a little boy, I'm talking like 5, 6, 7, 8, my grandmother would send him out the door on Sundays wearing his Sunday best with his brother, my Uncle Dale, to go to church on Sunday. These two boys did not go to church, ever. Did not go to church. They wore their Sunday best, they would go to the baseball diamond and play baseball, they'd play fetch and catch, and they'd hunt gophers or whatever, but they weren't going to church. So it just reminded me of that little story about my father when he was a little boy growing up on the ranch in Lovelock, Nevada. And if you knew my dad, and depending on how well you knew him, that story will mean more to you, because Bobby's going to do what Bobby's going to do, right? If you knew him well enough, that'll touch you in a certain way, I think. But as I said before, I joined the Air Force, and I joined because of my dad, because of his service as a civil servant. I wanted to serve my country the way that he did. Now, he never served in the military, but if he had served, he would have been a Vietnam War vet. And if he had gone to Vietnam, he would never have said, "Charlie, don't serve." He would have said, "Charlie, don't golf." It's a little Apocalypse Now humor for you. If you were in the military, I'm sure you saw that movie 100 times. But throughout my entire life, Dad loved golf, so I appreciate the comments about golf. Thank you for that. He would work 18 holes into every single weekend or every business trip, or anytime he could work it in, he would work it in. He just absolutely loved golf. It was easily his third love, right behind his family and the Bureau. And boy, did my dad love the Bureau. Almost as much as he loved us. He loved the Bureau and all the people in it. He cared deeply for the organization. Many of you know more about his career than I do, but I'm happy to just simply shed some light on him, on a side of him that you don't know. Bob Johnson, the father, the family man, the regular guy. And these are just some of my own memories. When my dad was hired as a GS-11 economist for the Bureau in Sacramento in 1974, 75, my grandfather Dorsey Johnson, said to him, "Bobby, one day you're going to be the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation." And my dad said at 24, 25, "No way, that's impossible. I could never do that." How wrong he was, right? And when I was a second lieutenant in the Air Force, brand new, newly commissioned, my dad said to me, "Gabe, one day you'll be a general." Well, that was my dad. He believed in people. He wanted to believe in me. He wanted to encourage me, and it was definitely a really nice show of fatherly support. When I was a second lieutenant, this reminds me of another story. I made the huge mistake of telling my dad something that he probably didn't realize before. So when he was regional director, he became an SES. If you know what that is, it's a senior executive service employee. It means you are no longer in the GS 11, 12, 15's, pay schedule anymore. You are now, you've arrived. I said, "Dad, guess what? An SES is exactly like a general equivalent in the Air Force." Huge mistake telling him that. Because every time he called me from then on, he'd say, "Gabe, this is General Dad." with the laugh. Everybody's familiar with that laugh, right? I heard it my whole life in the house. He'd be on the phone, on a phone call, and then, you'd hear the laugh. I can't do it right. I don't do it justice, but you know what it sounds like, yeah. But yeah, I had to hear that. It's General Dad on the phone. My dad would tell me things growing up like, guys will come to him and say, "I don't play politics. I don't get paid to play politics with people I work with." My dad thoroughly disagreed. My dad saw politics as an important part of this job, and sometimes politics was the primary duty. He taught me that when I was a teenager, and I never forgot that. It was certainly important to me in my career in the Air Force. As a young civil servant, my dad told me that he was always worried, always nervous, always running scared because he just wanted to do the right thing. And as a brand new, young kid, 25, right out of college, he wanted to impress, the senior workers that he was with at the Bureau. Well, at this office in Sacramento in the mid-70s, it was customary for all of the employees to take their 15-minute coffee break mid-morning. I mean, if the government says you can have 15 minutes for coffee in the morning, well, by God, we're going to take our 15-minute coffee break. And it's expected that you're going to be there. Well, my dad, he did that for as long as he could stand it, and then he wanted to break the mold. He said, "I'm not going to go to coffee break anymore. I'm going to work straight through it." And he would work through the coffee breaks, and he would work late into the night. And that's just the way he was. He never saw a difference between his time and the people's time. It was all the people's time, all the time. He worked at home, he worked all hours of the night, and I got to see that growing up, and that's how I lived my life. That's how I served in my career as an officer. So I certainly appreciate that example because I never once had any inkling of complaint in my career about having to work too long. I mean, look at how my dad worked. He was an animal about it. And that's an understatement. To say he was good at work was the understatement of the century. He was easygoing, right? He was friendly. He knew how to get things done. He knew how to treat people. But as a boss, his standards were high. And as a dad as well. Every single quarter, I had to show him a report card, and it better have been good. So, to his credit, I never got a C. A's were good. A's were what he wanted. B's were okay. C's were it's trouble. And to his credit, I never earned a C. Thank you, Dad. But that's how he was. He had an expectation, and he was the kind of guy you just didn't want to let him down. You just didn't, right? Nobody wanted to let Bob down, right? As a high school kid, he would come to my track meets. He would film me pole vaulting or running a race, and he always was interested in my career as a young officer in the military. He always wanted to hear about work. He was more interested in me then than I was in me as a kid. I think because work is his wheelhouse. That's exactly what he was good at, and that's when he really came to power as a father for me, and when I became a man. Like, that's what I got to work with. That was my advisor. Can you imagine having Bob Johnson as your personal advisor your whole career? I mean, that's amazing, right? And I'm so glad we got to hear about my sister Carly. Like, he raised a pharmacist, a daughter who's a pharmacist, who's an excellent girl dad. He was always taking my sister to her dance lessons, or encouraging her into different anything she wanted to do in life. She got to do it, and to this day, now she's married, has 3 kids, a successful pharmacist. Him and my mom did an excellent job. So I think that's worth mentioning, and I think it says a lot about him as a family man. Finally, when I was about 6 or 7, I was riding in a car with my dad. He was driving, and this is such a clear and vivid memory, and even at a young age, this is where he taught me the golden rule. We were just driving along, and he told me what it was. He said, simply treat others the way you want them to treat you. And this is the way he lived his life, and this is how I will choose to remember him for the rest of mine. And even though I'm not as good at treating others as the way they want to be treated, when I do reverse course, I think of my dad. Because he was so good at that. That was one of his biggest strengths, was just that golden rule. He could nail that every time and never forget it. If my dad was here today, he would certainly be at this conference, and he would certainly speak to every one of you like you were his best friend ever. He would certainly be incredibly proud to release his memoir at this event. And I'm sure somehow golf would be involved, right? I want to thank the following friends and colleagues of my dad for helping to publish his book in time for the conference: Doug Beeman, Terry Fulp, Lorri Gray, Chris Pauley, Laura Pauley, Rita Sudman, Jack Symes, Robert Snow, Britt Story, and Drake Wood. On behalf of my mother Mary and my sister Carly, and most importantly, on behalf of my dad, Robert Johnson, we thank you for this labor of love that you have so graciously donated. We hope that the history and the wisdom contained in its pages will continue to serve the water community for years to come. May God bless you all. May God bless the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. I love you, Dad. Thank you.
So many wonderful speakers, so many wonderful stories. Please get the book. It's important. The commissioner, that was so important to the commissioner, the Water Education Foundation.